And welcome back to Talking Shop. We are going to take a look at Romans 5 today, beginning at verse 6 through verse 15. So let's just go ahead and jump in.
Let's get to it.
Spit out my Lord in every way, yet I'm still welcome in the arms.
Well, welcome back to the epistle edition of Talking Shop. We're in Romans 5, 6 to 15. This is Pentecost 3. I'm always a little frustrated with the prick because it just seems so isolated, right? I mean, this little section right here, and it grabs a chunk of almost two different thoughts that Paul's having. So it's kind of a tough one to preach if you're gonna. I mean, yeah, it's Romans 5, right? And Romans is that core of what we believe about faith, because that's what it starts with, right? Is this piece on faith? But it'd be kind of hard because of the way it switches over a little bit. Verse 6: For yet Christ, while we were weak at the right time, he died for the ungodly. Recognizes our weakness, recognizes our lack of moving towards God, and at just the right time, when you least expected it. It's such an important part of our faith. So he did it when we needed him to do it the most, right?
Yeah.
He died for the ungodly, and then Paul makes this kind of interesting rhetorical remark where you kind of assume that he assumes that everybody's going to agree with him.
Yeah.
Because scarcely would, somebody die for a righteous person, but maybe for a good person they might be bold enough to die. I mean, that's the way the text talks about it. Whenever I read that, I always think, like, who would you sacrifice one of your kids for? Who would you go, yeah, I'm gonna kill my son for you, that kind of thing. And that list is real short, I can tell you that, right? You know what I mean? And here's God who does this for us, for the ungodly, right? For those who actually still don't like him very much. I think it's such an important piece.
Well, and Paul has already made the point earlier in this epistle that the ungodly is you. Right. For all have fallen short of the glory of God. What is that? Romans 3, 3:23. Right. The assumption is that we are all the ungodly. The assumption is that we are all justified by faith. So we're all on equal footing in the eyes of God.
Right. Yeah. And then there's nobody that gets out of this. Just in case you thought somehow that you were going to get out of this one, right?
Right. Like our police, firefighters, service members, right? They die for people who love them, right? Our communities love police and fire. Our country loves our service members. Those people die for people who love them.
Yeah.
Christ dies for people who hate him.
Yeah.
Although for law enforcement these days, depending on where you live, right?
Yeah.
It could not be that way. Yeah, and they put their life on the line for an idea, for the love of an idea, right? That order is better than chaos.
Yeah.
Whereas Christ comes and his idea is all about you. It's this very, very specific love piece that he comes in. Yeah, good. Showing his love for us, and that, right, here's verse 8. While we were still sinning, right, the Greek is very interesting right there. It's still in sin, right, still continuing to sin, still dead in sin, right. While we were in that place, Christ died for us, which I'm always fascinated by. That reminds me of like the guy that the buddies pulled down through the roof, and in front of Jesus, and they put him down there, and he didn't even say anything. Jesus forgives his sins, right? Or or the woman that with the jar of perfume and on his feet, and she doesn't say anything either. He just forgives her, right? Or the people standing around the cross, right? They're certainly not asking for forgiveness, and he's, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing, right? This idea that Christ forgives us even before we ask. It's simply a receive the gift piece.
Right. And for those of us at this table and watching this video, we were all born 2,000 years too late to decide whether Jesus was going to die for us.
Right. Yeah. He did that a long time ago.
Right.
Tough. Right.
He died for our sin before our parents even met.
Yeah.
Before we were born.
Yeah, and he did it without you asking his permission. You know what I mean? And without you seeking him out, without you any of that stuff, he just does it. And it always, even for us, so like in our worship services, we have that confession and absolution time. But honestly, that moment is a reminder of what is already reality.
Yeah,
it's not like you get some new forgiveness of sins piece or something. This is just a reminder that you already live in this space. You're forgiven.
We live in this now and not yet period.
Yeah.
And we have a God who continues to pour out grace upon grace upon grace upon grace.
Right.
He gives us grace,
Ongoing.
and we go and sin all over it.
Right. Yeah, we just crap all over it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder though, oftentimes, especially like in our church, people don't like, when I gotta go to church, I gotta confess. Because we get very Catholic on ourselves sometimes. No offense to our Catholic brothers and sisters, but we believe it different,
Yeah.
We get very Catholic on ourselves, like, if I don't show up or whatever.
That grace isn't infused to you.
Yeah, right. Right, thank you. That's right. Yeah. And so, but it's happened already. Yeah, good. Verse 9. And
Right, but we do believe that your sin is actually forgiven in that proclamation.
Yes and no. It is, but it's already forgiven too, right? It's this both and of the Christian life. Yeah.
It's the now and the not yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? You are a saint, but the people I live with, right, would say otherwise. Because I'm not a peach to live with, right? It's this paradox of now and not yet.
Right.
That you're simultaneously a saint and a sinner.
That's right.
We live in that weird space, the oxymoron of life, right?
That's right.
Yeah, good.
Verse 9.
Yeah. Since we are justified in Christ's blood, right, how much more shall we be saved by him from wrath? You're justified, and you're going to be saved. It's all of this pointing back to Christ. It's so funny, Dan and I, long before you got here, we were having this conversation about guys who don't go with their wives to church. This idea, and it's like, why not? I don't know. I don't understand it a lot of times because it's just always been such a part of who I am and what I do but it's just like, why not fail on the side of Jesus, right? But the worst thing that happens is a work righteousness thing, and you go anyways. You know what I mean? The best thing that happens is you get to live inside of this grace, inside of this mercy. You stop navel gazing so much and stop, having it be all about you.
Right.
It's a great question. Would I rather sit at home by myself on the couch, or would I rather sit on a bench next to a pretty lady?
Yeah. Right? That I'm married to. It's just, instead of having her travel around without me all the time. Yeah.
But another thing, just as something to grab onto for your people, that you don't have to clean yourself up to come to Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, you were an enemy of God by virtue of your birth.
Yeah.
The fact that you were conceived in iniquity and born in trespasses.
Well, that's where he's getting to, right? With this thing with Adam and everything he's going to talk about. Yeah. No, that's very good.
Yeah. So, if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son, much more, now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by his life, meaning his resurrection, that he continues to live on.
Right. Yeah, if the death does something, what about the resurrection? Right? I mean, because honestly, anybody can die.
Right.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to die.
And everybody does.
Yeah, exactly. But rise from the dead, well, that's a whole nother issue.
Yeah.
Right, it's a whole nother thing. Yeah. Verse 11, we rejoice in God, in Jesus, according to the received reconciliation, is the way the text talks about it. So it's this object of rejoicing, right? Because we've received this free gift. It's always that whole, man, Christians should be the most joyful people to be around. And sometimes we're the saddest sacks on the planet. It's like we should be the most joyful to be around because we have something far greater, something far better, right? This rejoicing in according to this reconciliation we have with God, the rightness we have with God. And then, boom.
Therefore.
He shifts, right? Therefore, just as through one man, right? Now he goes in that whole thing about Adam. He's going to talk about Moses and everything else. And this is that hard shift in this text. Just as through one man sin came into the world, and through sin death, right, Adam, so to all men death passed to all men. It repeats itself because everybody sins.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Thanks a lot, Adam.
Yeah. Yeah. And the funny thing is, though, right, if you'd have been there, you'd have done the same thing. If I'd have been there, I'd have done the same. I mean, it's just, it's...
And you still continue to do the same thing.
Right, yeah. Exactly. And this is how we know, right, is because we're still doing it. Every human being still does it.
Yeah.
Every created person. And then verse 13 is really, really hard in the Greek, kind of the way it's formed up. The English kind of helps us flesh it out a little bit. As far as for the law, sin was in the world, but sin was not charged to one's account where there is no law. What's he doing? He's setting up his argument, right? But what's he doing here? It's sort of a forensic thing, right?
Yeah, well, and he's building off of that of Romans 4, verse 25. It was counted to you. That whole thing with Abraham that we translated the last time for our last reading. That phrase, it was counted to him as righteousness, was written for your sake also, because Christ's righteousness is counted to your account.
Right. Well, and it's also his argument about if there's no law, there's no sin. Right, so in the state of Arizona, there's no law that says I can't lane split between cars that are sitting in traffic. There's also no law that says I can, right? Where like in other states, they have actual specific laws that you can. And so I still lane split, and if I ever get pulled over for it, it's going to be one of those things, well, there's no law against it. Well, there's no law for it. Well, it's one of those gray areas. And when I read this verse, I kind of think of that. It's like, if there's no law against it and everything's just kind of a gray area, you don't know where you stand. But then he says, we actually do know where we stand, verse 14, right?
And yet?
Yeah. Death reigned from Adam to Moses, even though there was no written law. Well, it's written on our hearts.
Right. There's a natural law.
Natural law, exactly, that everybody follows. Every society ever has said that, murder's bad. In some way, shape, or form, it's not okay to murder somebody. Or you got to take care of your parents for the most part. Or stealing from other people is bad, or taking what's not yours is bad, or lying is bad, right? And it's just kind of, it's built into all of us, and so we know it, right? Death reigned from Adam to Moses, even though their sin was not like Adam's, who was a type of the one to come. Adam's and the sin of pride and hubris, right, and the sin of eating from the fruit of the tree, right, all of that. It wasn't exactly that, but it's very similar to that, right? And then verse 15.
The free gift.
Right. We've had a ton of gospel in the first 5 or 6 verses. We get this law section, then you get to verse 15, and honestly, if you're preaching it, I think this is where you got to camp out for a minute. You can do that other stuff and then camp out in verse 15. But the free gift is not like the trespass, because if many died through one man's trespass, right, through Adam, and all of our trespass, much more have the grace of God and the free gift by the grace of that one man, Jesus Christ, abound for many. It's sort of an echo of that idea of if his death will do this, what about his life? What was that, verse 10? if many died from one man's trespasses, how much more does grace and mercy abound, reign? The text says, how much more does it rule in Jesus? And I think there you can launch off of, you have grace and mercy in Christ by your baptism. You have this calling to live as people of grace and mercy, possibly towards people that don't even ask you for grace and mercy first. Right? Verse 8, that kind of thing. Yeah. Verse 6, because if you're waiting around for somebody to ask for your forgiveness, you're going to wait a long time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you just hurt yourself. And this is one of those basic principles that God knows better than all of us, and that's why he comes to us long before we ask him, because he doesn't want us to live like that.
So how would we preach this?
How would you preach it? Yeah, exactly.
I think context is always important, because what do we start at? Verse 5 or verse 6? Go back to the beginning of chapter 5 and give that as the framework for what's going on here. Because if it starts with a therefore, you got to know what the therefore is about.
Therefore, yeah.
And that's what chapter 5 starts with. So
go back and watch our other videos on the rest of Romans 5.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I think you could do, like a multiple story structure on this too. You could use those ones that I mentioned earlier. You could use those ones or other ones. There's all sorts of examples of it, but you could crawl through the stories of forgiveness we find in Christ and how he comes to us over and over again, and all the different ways he comes to us. Of course, you've got to tie that into the resurrection, because it all hinges on the resurrection. But I think you could do that, because that's what this text is about, right? Forgiveness and reconciliation, and life in Christ.
I think I'm probably going to try to parallel Adam and Moses and Jesus. That Jesus is not just a greater Moses. Right? A lot of people think of Christianity as it's all about these rules, we have to keep the law. Right? But Jesus is not just a greater Moses.
Right.
He's actually going back before Moses, and he's a second Adam.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Yeah, because if he's just a greater Moses, that makes us Muslim. Or any manner of works righteous thing. Yeah.
All law and no gospel.
Right.
Right. And so Jesus is the second Adam. He goes back because Adam is the pattern for everybody, right? Everybody's a descendant of Adam. Everybody sins. Jesus is a second Adam.
Yep.
Who actually does fulfill the law on our behalf.
Yeah.
And it's not on our fulfilling of the law. It's that we are in Christ.
Yeah, and even there you can use a multiple story structure. You do just a retelling of Adam, a retelling of Moses, and then a retelling of Christ. And you show that movement through there, and Christ brings you back to the beginning, right?
Right. So, how did following the law work for anybody else? Well, they died, and they're still dead.
Right.
Yeah, their tombs are still with us to this day.
Yeah. I'm sure I've read that one somewhere. Right.
Yeah.
Right, but Jesus died, and he's not dead anymore.
Because he couldn't stay dead. That's why he's a radical God.
And on that note, like, subscribe, tell us how you did it. Tell us if you do this multiple stories on this, tell us how you did it. Or if you found another format, tell us what the structure you used was, what's your illustrations, and God bless your preaching.